Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. This is my first video and it is my story, my kid's story, our story of the NICU. So our first story begins in 2016. I found out I was pregnant with my baby and oh my goodness, I was so excited. I was so happy to be a mom and everything was going good. I mean, I didn't have any crazy symptoms. I slept a lot. I drank water and I ate regularly. So everything was, everything was good for me. But fast forward to 5 months pregnant, I decided that I was going to get a new doctor because I had been driving a whole hour to get to my appointments and I needed somewhere closer to home. So during this process, which I didn't know would take a whole 2 months before I seen a doctor. So during the 2 months, I used the hospital as my main source of care. If I had any questions, any comments, any concerns, I would go to the hospital. So at 5 or 6 months, I had my first hospital visit. I had been having sharp pains in my belly. So I took an Uber to the hospital and they just said I was dehydrated. They gave me a bunch of water and they sent me on my way. Boom, that was it. Now, at 7 months, it was Thanksgiving weekend and something wasn't right. I hadn't felt the baby move. That wasn't normal for him. So I felt like I needed to go to the hospital. My boyfriend felt like I was overreacting. But in the end, we decided, okay, I'm going to go to the hospital. So we get to the hospital and they quickly, put the monitors on you and everything. And right away, they found a heartbeat. They seen him moving and everything. So I'm like, okay, perfect. I get to go home now and I get to get some sleep for work tomorrow. But they were like, no. They're like, your blood pressure is a little high, so we're going to keep you for a few more hours just so we can monitor you. And I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. But then there's a lady, she comes to give me an IV. And I'm like, okay, well, you guys didn't do this the last time. They're like, oh, well, we might need to give you some medicine to lower your blood pressure. And so I'm like, okay, whatever. But after a few hours, they're like, okay, now we got to get you into your own room because we're going to have to keep you overnight because your blood pressure, it's not going down. It's still really high. And so I'm like, okay, that's fine, whatever. So we get into the room, we're comfortable. My boyfriend is able to sleep on the sofa that's in their room. And, we get settled in a little bit. Then the doctor comes in and she's like, you know what? We're going to have to keep you for a couple of days. You're going to deliver this baby within the next couple of days. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm only 7 months pregnant. I can't have this baby. Like, what do you mean? So immediately I'm like bawling by the eyes. I don't know what to do. I can't even process it to really ask any questions. I'm just like, what the hell is going on? So I'm just crying. And of course, when you're crying, your blood pressure is probably going to go even higher. So I'm just crying. They're like, just don't worry about it. Just get some rest. So I finally fall asleep. And within like 10 minutes of me sleep, I wake up to a room full of people. It's literally a person here having me sign a paper, a person here saying, we're about to give you a C-section, a person here that has putting a catheter in me, another person that has me signing another paper, another person that's shaving my vagina. It's like really traumatizing. Like, I don't know what the hell is going on. I'm constantly crying and crying and crying. My boyfriend is on the other side behind all of the doctors. He's over there. I'm like, call my mom, call her. He's blowing her phone up. She's not answering because she's asleep. It's the middle of the night. And I'm just like, what the heck? What the heck is going on? And like, I don't know. I would just say it was very, very traumatizing. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. It was really traumatizing. And, to this day, it's still really hard for me to talk about, but, I'm getting more comfortable with it. So they get me into the room. Within 10 minutes of me on the table, I hear Ajamu crying. And I'm like, okay, we did it, But they quickly wheel him down to the NICU. So him and his dad, they leave me and they go to the NICU. And after I'm being patched up and everything, I go to ICU. So I spent 3 days in ICU. I'm bedridden. I can't walk. I can't do anything. But luckily, at the hospital, they have a camera that's on my baby 24/7. So I'm able to log in into an account and I could see him at any time. So while I'm pumping or whatever, I could see him. And that lasted for, I want to say 2.5 to 3 days. So I wasn't able to see him in person at all for during that time. And at that time, he had a blood transfusion, and he had a platelet transfusion. And of course, he had the IV put in, and he was hooked up to a bunch of different machines, and he had the machine to help him breathe a little bit because his lungs wasn't fully developed. And that was the first 3 days of his life. So on the third day, I was finally able to see my baby, and oh my goodness, it felt like forever. And I remember just going down there and actually touching him for the first time, and I just broke down and cried. Like, what could I have done differently? You know, is there anything I could have done differently to avoid this, to avoid him being in this position? And the doctors always reassured me that there was nothing that I could have done. If this was going to happen, it was just going to happen, and that's just what it is. So his first month of life, he spent at the hospital that he was born at. It was a month of just roller coasters, up and down, up and down. At one point, he had graduated, and it was just exciting. They said, you know, all he needs to do was gain a little weight, because he was born at 2 pounds 13 ounces. They said all he needed to do was gain a little weight and that he could go home. But then it's like, I go home and I go to sleep, and the next day he's back to where he started, plus more problems, and it just doesn't make any sense. So he was being followed by endocrinology for his blood sugars. So they was constantly poking his feet to get blood to check his sugars. He was being followed by gastroenterology for his liver. His belly kept getting distended or swollen, so they would make him NPO, which is basically not giving him anything to eat, just so he won't get that disease. He was being followed by cardiology because he had a murmur. He also had a bleed in his brain. He also had the transfusions, the blood transfusion, so he was being monitored for that. And then he had a procedure to get a line put in that was central, so that way he wouldn't have to have the IV, because the central line lasts longer than the IV. If he had the IV, it would last for a couple of days, and they would have to take it out and use the other arm and find another vein. So they kept poking him, and they finally decided to put the line in. So he still has a little scar here from when he had that line put in. But, so that was his first month. He was going back and forth. He had a ton of tests. And at one point, they tried to blame it on me, the NICU doctors. They said, you know, the only thing I could think of is that you might have like an STD, like herpes or something, that could cause him to have a low birth weight and to cause him to have all these problems. So I literally went home and I was crying. I drove around like, how could I have known this? I would have never had him. I would have never done this to him. And it came back that I didn't have herpes, and that didn't cause him to, you know, have any of these problems. It was, you know, it was still unknown. And so at this point, that all of the tests came back that, you know, nothing was wrong, or that this didn't cause it, they decided to send him to the children's hospital. At the children's hospital, where he spent an additional 2 months, in addition to his 1 month at his birth hospital, he spent 2 months. And it was pretty awesome, because these doctors, they specialize in children. They should know exactly what is wrong with my baby, right? Well, that's not the case. So he spent 2 months there, and it was a roller coaster. He had gone under so many tests with the dyes put in his butt, different dyes, radioactive dyes, bunch of x-rays. He had another PICC line put in. He had just a number of procedures there and a number of tests that he had went through, and nothing came back. We still didn't have no answers. What could have caused my baby to have so many problems? And the main problem was gastroenterology. So the main problem was his liver and him pooping. That was the main concern. I mean, everything else was still a concern, but this was the main one. And so, you know, it was just an up and down. He would be on at least like 5 different medications at one time. And then he would have the IVs. Then he would be NPO, which is basically they're not giving him any milk. And that was the hard part, because he would be on a solution called TPN, which is basically supposed to fill in for the milk that he's not receiving. So for example, say for instance, he's supposed to be receiving 3 ounces of milk, but he's only maybe drinking like 1 ounce. They would make up for that 2 ounces that he's missing with the TPN. And so basically the TPN is supposed to go down and the milk is supposed to go up. But at one point he would be in a hospital, and I would go and visit him, and he would be doing fine. He would be drinking his milk. Then the next morning I would go and see him, and nope, no milk. He was now only on TPN. Then they would start going back up again, and then nope, no milk. And so it was just like a back and forth thing with the whole TPN and milk solution. So that was our main concern. And then on top of that, he had the feeding tube, so he wasn't able to drink from a bottle. And on top of that, that wasn't a concern for them, that he wasn't able to drink. They were like, first we need to get through all of this other stuff. He can learn how to drink from a bottle anytime. And so during that whole process with the whole milk and the TPN, you know, he wasn't learning how to drink from a bottle. He was just basically laying there. But they would have the therapist come out and stretch him and do like little things with him and stuff like that. And of course I would be there, so I would try to get him to do tummy time. I would do bonding with him, kangaroo bonding. I would try to spend a night there at least once a week. And you know, that was the 2 months of our life. 2 months, just a roller coaster. During the times that I was sick, because I was so stressed, I would get sick for like 2 weeks at a time and not be able to see him. I would call up there and I would ask. I was so like knowledgeable about my son's case that I would know each one of the medicines that he was on. I would know how many ounces of milk he was receiving, how many ounces of TPN he was on. I would know everything. And so when I would call, I would be like, so is he on this medication, this one? Has anyone been added? Is he going for a procedure? What is he doing now? You know, when is his next feeding? When is this? When is that? And so that was just my life while I was sick. And that was our 2 months. And so towards his 3rd month, he had been three months already. He's made it to 3 months of life, and he was doing much better. Of course, it was always that roller coaster, but now they were starting to teach him how to suck from a bottle. Along with, he also had the feeding tube, so that wasn't going to go anywhere, the feeding tube. And he was getting closer to coming home. All he needed to do now was to learn how to suck from a bottle, but he didn't want to. He was like, I don't want to do this. I don't care what anybody says. I'm not going to do it. And so that was a battle. But during my nights there, I would learn how to put in the feeding tube, which is through his nose. It's called an NG tube. So I would learn how to put the tube into his nose, and basically you put the milk through there, and that's how he eats. It goes right to his belly. So I learned how to do that. And once I learned how to do that, they were like, okay, you know, he could go home. You know, he had been doing much better, but he also was on a bunch of medication. So he came home on about 5 different medications. And one was for like his blood sugar, one was for his liver, and one was like for something else. Like, I know he was on like iron and stuff like that. And he came home on all of that. He also came home with the NG too. But my baby is so smart. I want to say about a week, or actually a couple of days out of the hospital, he was like, nope, I don't want it. So he snatched it out, and I wasn't confident with putting it back in. So I just left it out, and I gave him the bottle. Just like that, he started drinking from a bottle. I was just like, my baby. I think he was like more comfortable being at home and stuff. So he started drinking from a bottle. Within a month of him being home, I took out all of his medications. I canceled them. I was like, you're not getting all of these medications anymore. And when we went to the hospital to check all of his liver panels and all of that stuff, what do you know? It was getting better. It was getting better. And, you know, like, of course, I'm just happy. Like, okay, my baby is getting better. And they're like, oh, just keep giving him the medicine. Just keep giving him the medicine. But I had stopped giving him the medicine like a month after he had been out of the hospital. And my baby was getting better. So, I mean, you know, every NICU story is different. His just happened to be that way, where the medicine wasn't helping him. You know, I don't know about any other story, but that's how his was. I stopped the medicine and my baby got better. That's what it is. And that's our story. That's the story of Ajamu. So in 2017, Ajamu was about 9 months old, and I found out I was pregnant again. I mean, it was very shocking, but it is what it is. It was going to happen. So my pregnancy with Aman was harder, only because Ajamu, he needed extra attention. He wasn't walking yet and he was delayed. So I needed to provide that attention and that care for him. But that was about, you know, that was the gist of my pregnancy with Aman. My delivery was easier though. It was much easier because it was expected. I had a scheduled C-section, so I knew what day I was going to have him. I knew what time. I knew everything. I knew what I needed to do. So I was very prepared for him. And his delivery, he came out within 10 minutes, and I heard him, and I was able to see him right away. He was doing perfect. So that was really good, until I went to the postpartum unit, and the nurse was like, I don't like the way he's breathing. I need to take him to the NICU. And so he went to the NICU, and they basically said during the birth that somewhere in here, his nose and his mouth, they were suctioning him because he had some fluids in there from the birth, and that's what was causing him to breathe a little funny. But luckily, he didn't need any, he didn't need to get on the breathing machine. He didn't need to, like, really get anything. They just basically suctioned him. And he spent about a day and a half in the NICU, and next thing you know, he was able to come up to me. I think that's his story. That's both of my kids' story. That's my story. That's our story of the NICU. If you have any questions or you have a story that you would like to share with me, you can feel free to email me. I'm going to leave my email down below, or you could DM me in my Instagram. Thank you for watching. Bye, guys.